Okay, my friends, it is Wednesday, November 13th, and I have 11 big stories for today. We're going to go very quickly. The first is this: Trump is meeting with Biden at the White House. I can only imagine that this is an awkward conversation that they're having because if you're calling somebody a fascist throughout the campaign, then he probably doesn't appreciate that. And if Trump is calling him a doddering old fool throughout that time, likewise. But so part of what happens in elections is that there is a overblown rhetoric, and everybody kind of understands that. And so now they're going to try to figure out what they can do to work together. I hope that Biden is telling Trump the right kinds of things about Ukraine, not telling him don't escalate or you're going to create a problem with Putin where you're going to have World War III. I hope that's not what's going on, but we're not there. I just don't know what he'll be saying to Trump. Okay, next, this is Jason J. Smart talking about key decisions that will drive Ukraine's future are being made in Mar-a-Lago. Right now, this week, it's happening, and Team Ukraine's just not actually there being part of this conversation. Key decisions that will drive Ukraine's future are being made as Republicans flock to Mar-a-Lago. While future cabinet members are selected, and we've already talked about a number of those, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, Ukraine's voice is silent, causing one to wonder, where is Team Ukraine? That's a good question. Trump's new national security advisor, Representative Mike Waltz, correctly observed on Fox News last month that, quote, China, Russia, and Iran are not trying to compete with us, they're trying to replace us. And this was echoing Senator Marco Rubio, the future Secretary of State, who earlier referred to Russia as China's junior partner in the anti-US coalition. So let's talk about those that were involved in this. So he just talked about Waltz, and this is Waltz on this side, and this is Rubio. Waltz factored in big in my three big stories segment yesterday. Huge Green Beret Waltz to replace lawyer Jake Sullivan. Yeah, that's actually a good pick. Now, Rubio, it's an open question. Now, I think Rubio may deserve his own video. Secretary of State is an important job, and Rubio has been a conservative over time, but he's kind of shifted a little bit into a MAGA lane lately, and we'll talk about that. Now, in the meantime, Trump tapped Kristi Noem as now she's the governor of South Dakota as the Secretary for Homeland Security. Now, Kristi Noem doesn't strike me as particularly being a great candidate for that. My wife was asking me about this and looking at me like, why would he do that? Because she's a Trump loyalist, all MAGA all the time, has that perception of the world, and it doesn't hurt that she was a governor. So there's some legitimacy, because just to become a governor and administer your state, you have to have hopefully some competence. Now, I would prefer a grizzled old cop who was in charge of the police department in New York or something like that, but I think she'll do an okay job in that particular role. Okay, so we're replacing a four-star general as defense secretary with the weekend co-host of Fox and Friends. So this is Pete Hegseth, who is apparently the pick for Secretary of Defense. That whole thing deserves its own video, and that will be forthcoming. We'll talk more about that in some detail. Now, this comment from a staff writer at Politico was really interesting. Stunned by the Hegseth nomination? Just wait for Attorney General and DNI. Hegseth dropped literally as I was typing this up, warning that the earlier nominations today were meant to soften up the ground for the really WTF nominations to come. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see how that all plays out. So we'll talk more about nominations in forthcoming videos, just so that you're understanding what the team, now look for the team and the people that Trump listens to, and you'll be able to project what he's going to do. Meanwhile, the Kyiv Post carries this: likely to deflect growing criticism of Biden's administration policies of protecting Putin, U.S. Secretary of Statements Anthony Blinken met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Brussels, pledging to somehow bolster support for Ukraine in the next 2 months ahead of Trump's return. Blinken also warned that any deployment of North Korean troops to back Russia in the conflict, quote, demands and will receive a strong statement, because he's a Secretary of Statements, and that's about all that comes from him. Most of these major world leaders have just kicked the can down the road. Great work by Obama, Merkel, Steinmeier, Biden, Schultz. They all enabled our adversaries. They did almost nothing to prevent the outbreak of war, which was very predictable. And there's something to that. Now, this is the NATO Military Committee Chairman, Rob Bauer, and listen to what he's saying.
I'm absolutely sure if the Russians did not have nuclear weapons, we would have been in Ukraine, kicking them out. We would have.
Did you just hear that? He said if the Russians did not have nuclear weapons, we would have been kicking them out of Ukraine. So this is the textbook definition of deterrence, and that is that the Russians have deterred us, which is not how it's supposed to be working. All right, let's look at Russia now. On October 25th, 2024, Central Bank of Russia, this is the British intelligence update, the Central Bank of Russia raised its base interest rate to 21%. If you don't understand how this works, that's extremely high. This is the highest rate since the start of the Ukraine conflict and represents the CBR's concerns about growing inflationary pressures in the Russian economy. CBR Governor Elvira Nabiullina said that more drastic changes to monetary policy might be required to get inflation under control. However, there is growing criticism of the CBR's decision to keep interest rates high from key business executives across multiple Russian industries. High interest rates in the Russian economy are highly likely to restrict business investment and growth. So you have this problem or you have that problem, and you just have to choose which problem you're going to be living with. Since the beginning of the war in 2022, the volume of corporate loans and the proportion of them tied to the CBR's base rate have increased. As a result, higher interest rates are leading to increasing costs of debt. The costs are highly likely exacerbating financial pressures on business, with corporate bankruptcies in Russia reportedly 20% higher in 2024 than they were in 2023, and it'll keep going as time goes on. Inflationary pressures will highly likely continue to intensify in 2025 as government spending is forecast to increase and labor shortages and pressure from sanctions persist. This will lead to increasing trade-offs between efforts to control inflation and supporting growth of the Russian economy. So they're in bad shape. Everybody can see it, but Russia keeps denying it. Now, it's to the point that even this happened, like not just inflation, but like they're low on equipment and things along these lines. So here, the Mosfilm studio boasted to Putin it handed over tanks and armored vehicles produced in the 1950s, stored in the studio's warehouse for the special military operations needs. We provided charitable support of 8 million rubles this year, including 6 million for the special military operation needs. By the way, in 2023, we handed over to the armed forces 28 T-55 tanks, 8 PT-76 tanks, 6 BMPs, and 8 tractor units, which we had stored at the military technical base. When I learned there was a need, I contacted the Ministry of Defense, and they took these vehicles. These are our results. We are proud of Mosfilm. That's not a good sign or a healthy sign that they're doing well, that they have to get these from the film industry in order to, yeah, okay. Meanwhile, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres shook hands with Russian Prime Minister Mishustin. Okay, Mishustin complained to Guterres that illegal visa restrictions from the U.S. prevent representatives from normally participating in the work of the UN General Assembly. Well, he'll get down to the bottom of that because that shouldn't happen. But doing something about the special military operation that is ravaging Ukraine, I don't think a lot's going to get done about that. Anton Gerashenko comments, honestly, at this point, why do we move the whole institution to Russia? Russia's just making a mockery of the UN by saying that they're with the UN or trying to work with the UN or pass things in the UN and cynically not abiding by the UN Charter. Meanwhile, Putin will not attend the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. The Russian delegation will instead be led by Foreign Minister Lavrov. Allegedly, Putin decided to skip the summit to avoid disrupting smooth progress. Well, isn't that noble of him? And maybe it's also because he might be arrested, because Brazil is a signatory to the Hague Convention and they would have to turn him over. So there's that. Okay, this was really interesting to me because if Donald Trump was going to just do Putin's bidding, like just outright, like I'm his lapdog, I'm going to do whatever he wants. Why would they play stuff like this? This is the most interesting thing. What Russian media is doing is kind of mocking Trump and fighting with him rather than just being silent or saying, yay, he's going to do these great things for Russia. But they're not doing that. Okay, let's listen to this. You know, after Ginger, that's Donald Trump, killed an Iranian general and almost started World War III, there's a lot of doubt about his ability to stop wars. According to Trump's team members, he has a long list with the names of people he promised revenge on after his victory. Danya is not a touchy person, just a little vindictive and very vengeful. The list includes election rival Kamala Harris, current U.S. President Joe Biden, his son Hunter, former U.S. President Barack Obama, and okay, so this is just nonsense being spewed, and it's to create conflict where no conflict actually exists. He's going to take vengeance on Barack Obama? What's he even talking about? But again, this is Russian state media. But they're not saying, yay, Trump's going to make the deal and give us Ukraine. And they're not just being silent about it, which would also be a good strategy if Trump was actually going to deliver. It's really interesting to watch. All right, shifting gears to another big story. Kate from Kharkiv says, I'm still losing subscribers. If those are bots, I'm absolutely fine with it. But if real people are deleting their accounts to switch to another social media, please reconsider. So there's this big move from Twitter, or X, over to BSKY. Now, I'm not sure what I think about this yet, but I don't see it as a healthy thing, and I'll explain why in a moment. You're leaving this platform free for propaganda and leaving Ukrainians here to scream into the void even more. Now, the Guardian newspaper is no longer posting on X either. They're going over to BSKY. X is now valued at $9.4 billion. Truth Social's parent company, Trump Media, is now worth $10 billion, and rumor has it Musk and Trump may merge the two. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with X or Truth or whatever, but if there's a mass exodus from the left on Twitter, which it's bizarre that I'm even the guy saying this, because I remember back in 2020 where I felt somewhat persecuted on Twitter because it seemed like the algorithms were all against conservatives. Remember, Trump was kicked off Twitter, and then there was also some controversy about, push against conservatives, and that's before Elon bought Twitter and renamed it X. And so, yeah, a movement here from here to BSKY, I don't think is going to do anything useful except for create a different echo chamber until the trolls fill up BSKY. So I'm not sure how much of a solution this is, but I don't know what I don't know. So please tell me in the comments below what you think is happening here. Now, Boris Johnson is no longer in power, but he still has some moral voice when it comes to Ukraine because he was the figure that was first coming to Ukraine's aid. Here's what he had to say about Putin today.
And when I listen to Putin talking about Russian language speakers in parts of Ukraine, the need to take over that country, I hear the voice of Hitler. I hear it's exactly the same argument. And be in no doubt that if he were to succeed in Ukraine, that country would be turned into a vassal state of Russia. It would cease to have any democratic independence. And around the world, it would look like the West had been defeated. It was the extinction of democracy. I see the
And that's exactly right. It would be the defeat of the West. And Trump has to be aware of that. And that's one of the reasons that I have some hope. Now, Ukraine has no choice but to keep fighting. With or without the United States, come what may, they have to keep going because the alternative is the erasure of Ukrainian identity. Here's the Helsinki Commission.
The Ukrainian people have no choice. Putin has made clear, and our intelligence agencies brilliantly picked this up before the big invasion, their intention to impose their vision of what Ukrainians should be, which is, to use a historic and not much appreciated phrase in Ukraine, little Russians, not to have their own identity as a separate people. We see this in the brutal war crimes that are being conducted in occupied Ukraine against Ukrainians who want to speak the Ukrainian language, who don't want to worship in the Russian Orthodox Church. So Ukraine has no choice. And the people understand that. And even though they are suffering greatly, they don't have an alternative but to fight on because, as the former leader in Kherson said to me 18 months ago, living under Russian bombs is bad, but living under Russian occupation is far worse.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and that's right. They have to keep going, and they will keep going. Now, I talked about this yesterday, this video. If you're going to watch one video from me, watch this one. This explains the Russian mentality, why no deal is possible. And you have to watch this and get this into your head. Please watch it. After you watch it, tell me if you got an aha out of this. Just put aha, A-H-A, just like if that made sense to you, because I think this is explanatory of what's happening, why it's happening, and what will happen in the future. So with that, I'll leave you today. Thank you, my friends, for the likes, the shares, the subscribes. Please watch this video, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.